Hello everyone and welcome back. Now today we are going to be working on Tidus from Final Fantasy. It is a commission, so I was not commissioned to do the wig or the props. But what we are going to be going through is the blue shorts, the suspender shorts, the yellow jacket, and all of the parts that are on his left arm. Anyways, one of his arms has like armor and things on it, so we're going to be also doing that. Now, I just want to forewarn you that the footage from this video is using my old cameras, like the old way I used to do my videos, which was while I was streaming using my webcams. So it's not going to be as crisp as my more recent videos, but it's not that bad. Don't worry, but we'll get through it. Like I said, I've been saying in many videos, there's a huge backlog that I need to get through of videos that haven't been edited yet. But you know what? The progress is progressing. Oh, also, before there's anybody coming in the comments telling me, actually, it's not Tidus, it's Tidus. I haven't really played any Final Fantasy games, but there is a particular individual that comes into my chat who said that the majority of the fan base was rejecting Tidus as the way you pronounce his name, so I'm just gonna follow that, and I'm gonna keep saying Tidus because it makes more sense. He's a water guy, you know, he's the tides, he's a water boy. By the way, this project has been done for a while now, so there are actually photos of the client wearing the costume along with the wig that was made by and the props made by. Also, you might want to check out the client because not only do they do cosplay, but also cosplay photography, so that's always fun. There's going to be links down below in the description for that. Well, like any project, this one starts with patterning. This time I did a mock-up. I usually don't do mock-ups because I personally find it wasteful, but I needed these lines to match up, so a tracing wheel is perfect for the job. The fabric I'm using is a thin-ish yellow corduroy. The original design doesn't seem to have a texture to it, but I thought something matte would contrast well with the faux leather later. And the lining will be this, whatever fabric this is. You'll see here that I'm cutting the lining the full length of the pattern, but the yellow from earlier was cut with part of the pattern line folded. This is going to make sense later. I just wanted to point it out in case it wasn't obvious because I didn't really leave enough footage to explain it properly. Each yellow piece was cut twice as if it was going to be used as its own lining, as well as a couple layers of batting. The pattern lines once again are tracing wheeled, but this time on the yellow. I can see them, but I'm going to use a pencil to very lightly make them even more visible. Since we're going to be sewing all the way front to back on some of these lines, the shoulder seams get seamed up now, but not the sides. The batting is placed in between the two layers, test was conducted, and the layers can now be pinned together. Now the reason why I'm pinning it like this is because I don't want to accidentally sew in any like puckers or stretches into these lines. I'm going for bouncy castle, not curly fries, if that makes sense. And this is kind of just a lazy way of basting it, because I could have basted it by hand, but ain't nobody got time for that. This way, I can sew along the lines nicely while holding a gentle tension on the fabric to further avoid puckers. The right sleeve gets the same treatment, including the longer lining piece, but before the lining can be connected, we need this little pocket boy. I'm using faux leather, so I have to protect the material from the iron with a little piece of scrap cotton. I'm also making this pocket functional. It's small, sure, but you could fit a debit card, business cards, stickers, maybe even a con pass. There's also these decorative flappy tabs that I, for some reason, decided to line. This is going to be very fun to turn inside out. Listen, you don't have to do this, just make sure the edge is clean. At this point, I hadn't marked the pocket placement on the pattern, so hey, you don't have to do any of the measuring. With the zipper already installed, I'm just sewing all the way around. The metal buttons I'm using here are those kinds used for fabric-covered buttons, so I have to super glue the halves together. And they get sewn in with the flappy tabs. Alright, so here's where that longer lining comes in. This is a flashbang, but it's sewn around. It's actually longer by 2 times the amount I want it to fold around. Turned inside out, and now it should match up perfectly with the arm's eye edge. I did the exact same thing but in reverse with the red sleeve, so that the red wraps on the inside, leaving a little bit of a border. I wanted the lining to be consistently the white fabric throughout, but I didn't want any of it showing on the red sleeve. Oh, and the bottom edge of the jacket too. The rest of the lining just gets machine basted onto the outer layer to keep it steady. The top edges of the sleeves need a little bit of easing, so I'm hand gathering the edge. Easing is when you need to manipulate a larger area of fabric into a smaller area of fabric. The arm's eyes get overlocked, and now I'm patterning the front hood edge flap combination. It was a weird thing to pattern, so again, you don't have to do it yourself. Oh hi, yes, that's right, I have patterns for all of this on my website. How could I forget? The pattern includes the blue shorts, do you mind? The pattern includes the blue shorts, the suspender shorts, the yellow jacket, and all of the stuff that goes on the, and all of the stuff that goes on the arms, so all of the armor parts. So yeah, Tidus does have 2 sets of shorts at once. He's a man of many shorts. Just like Griffith was a man of many cuffs, the ghoul was a man of many belts and holsters, and Tidus, well, he gets the title of man of many shorts. Who knows what'll be next? It's a crazy world. It's a crazy world out there. Anyways, this gets cut out of the white fabric and seamed together. There's 2 of these also, since it's going to be lined with itself. It's just seamed on and overlocked. I decided to stitch the edge towards the white side to avoid adding a top stitch on the yellow side. Blue shorts time. So, Tidus is a water guy, so it seems fitting to use lycra for the blue shorts. Also, it's not that deep. It's mostly just because it's a good stretch fabric for something that's form-fitting to the body. The blue shorts also has a different shade of blue, long hexagons adorning its border. I wanted something non-stretch for this, for reasons I'll disclose later. This video is on a need-to-know basis. Anyways, the edges are ironed inwards, nice and crispy with the clapper, some edges clip, and then our friend the tracing wheel makes a comeback. Okay, sorry for the flashbang again, but the reason for the non-stretch is because I want to be able to edge stitch this and have it stay perfectly crisp. A stretch fabric would risk puckering and shifting. Also, in case you're wondering, this won't affect the stretch fit of the shorts because 1, the pattern isn't made to need to stretch very much, and 2, the areas in between could stretch enough to account for the additional space. I feel like I worded that weird, but there's no time to revise. We need to add stuff to the hexagons. The fabric won't fray, so no overlock needed, but I did use some scalloped pinking shears to give them a finished look. I also wanted to add some elastic to the waistband to give it a little bit more strength, and to make sure they would stay up. The last thing we want is for a client's pants to fall down, okay? Also, in case you're wondering why I hexagoned both legs despite only one side showing, my reason was so that both legs would feel the same when being worn. I know, it's kind of dumb considering the fact that the other shorts that goes on top is asymmetrical as well and would no way, shape, or form feel the same on both legs. So, if you are making this pattern, or if you bought my pattern, just don't hexagon the other leg. The last thing needed here is a yellow border. I went with some yellow elastic. I figured it's yellow and it stretches. Okay, moving right along with the suspender shorts. Remember what I said about lycra because he's a water guy? Well, throw that out the window. Chuck that right out the window because we are using faux leather. There's also a grid involved, so time to cut many strips. Overlock the edges, no time to cut in between. Do the rest while we're at it, and then let's make the grid future me's problem. You'll notice I'm kind of lightly pulling this. The inside of the faux leather is this suede-like texture and it's gripping to my sewing machine. The dial here changes the pressure on my presser foot, so I could have messed with it a little bit. But yeah, I wasn't using my brain.
You're not using your brain.
So use tearaway interfacing underneath like this or like this, but we're gonna see more of this one later. Yeah, this one was a mistake. It was an accidental purchase. I probably didn't read the description correctly, but it has come in handy on multiple occasions throughout multiple projects, just not as interfacing. Oh, and the other option would be a walking foot, but I don't have one because I have a Bernina and they're very expensive for Bernina machines. Again, to iron the vinyl side of these fabrics, you have to use a protective layer for your iron. There are those who will say you can't iron this stuff. You can, just be careful with the heat setting and use a protective layer over it. I seamed everything up here, but I didn't go all the way up on the front seam. That'll be left for later. So there's a lot of zipper stuff going on this costume too, and some of it is decorative. The left leg is decorative, so no need to line anything up. The hem of the faux leather was folded inward and ironed though, so that this edge could look nice and clean before top stitching it to the zipper tape. The other side of the shorts, however, gets a little bit funky. I need to add a half full panel and a half crisscross panel to the right short. So let's start with a strip at the top and bottom, but only sew one side. Oh, remember that accidental purchase from earlier? Here it is. I use it all the time to sew sticky fabrics. See how stretchy this fabric is? So if I sew this and it grips whatsoever to my machine, I'll end up sewing in a little bit of a twist, which we don't want. Now check out how the interfacing completely eliminates that. And it can be torn away. It reminds me of that game with the little magnets and the hair. I forget what it's called. Now place it over the guide like it's a pie and start hammering holes into it. Because we need more rivets. The guide continues to be useful to make sure everything stays lined up and the pie can be pinned into position onto the strips. I'm sewing all the way through to have one continuous top stitch line. And now, time to close the loop. I'm only securing the pie bits here so I can turn it over and top stitch it all the way through. Here's a step I should have done before closing the loop though. If any of you guys want this file because you use a cry cut or a scan and cut like I do, just let me know, shoot me a message or something, and I can put it up on my website for free. There's actually 2 of these, so there's be 2 different sizes. But if you don't worry, you could still do this shape as a regular applique or by painting it on, doing some fabric painting, something like that. As I just mentioned, I'm using my scan and cut to half cut this vinyl applique. There's a red layer and a yellow layer, so let's weed this out. Measure 9 million times and then iron it on. So usually you're supposed to set the iron to a cotton setting and hold it down for like 15 or so seconds. I am not going to do that since, like I said earlier, you gotta watch the heat with this fabric. You let it cool a little, then apply more heat until your transfer tape lets you lift it off. I usually give it another pass afterwards too. Alright, so some of these strips needed to be riveted to the full part of the tube. So make sure you plan ahead for that. You can use this shot as reference if you don't know which ones to leave out. More zippers. I found that it was easier to add zippers to the tube first and then worry about the edge that has to line up with the shorts. The bottom edge of the zipper is decorative, but the top one does have to connect. This can technically separate from the shorts even though the design doesn't really call for it. Using separating zippers made my life easier, and I think I could only find this type of metal zipper as a separating one. We aren't at the weird part yet, so let's move on to the suspender straps. I patterned them in pieces in order to save on fabric because cutting 2 long V shapes out of my faux leather just seemed like a bad move. The long strips were pillowcase lined, and so is this trapezoid looking piece. But this one gets turned inside out from the short edge. Believe it or not, this was not a nightmare to turn inside out. I know, that's highly irregular, right? I would recommend sliding a piece of nylon strap the correct width or something into the straps before top stitching too, to provide more strength and to prevent the straps from majorly stretching. The reason why that top edge was the chosen one earlier is because you can now slide this part of the strap into it. It gets stitched down all the way around too, and guess what? Another zipper. And here's another one of these. You know, in case you thought I was lying about the fact that there was 2 of them earlier. Okay, so I don't normally do a full tutorial style because we would be here all day. But for this part, I'm gonna slow things down a little bit so you can really see how this part of the costume is made. The suspender half of the shorts is done in 2 main parts. The upper half isn't crazy. The sides just get seamed together. The lower flaps get a little bit weird. Let's start with the side seams. Press what needs to be pressed. Pillowcase line the top half. Clip the curves in the corners to allow for a smooth inside outage, and now let's come back to the lower half. We left the front and the back seams open, so let's mark the back with a pin where we need to stop seaming. This is probably marked on the pattern, but I didn't have that yet. Now, clip the distance of the seam allowance where that pin or marking was. The non-curved edge is what you want to seam together, and it should look like this. We're going to be pillowcase lining the bottom edge now as well as the front edges. Start from the front edges and then stop stitching when you reach the end of the middle back here. Repeat on the other side. More corner and curve clipping. I don't think I've ever explained the clipping thing, so here's MS Paint. This is how you clip into an inner or outer curve. Then when it's turned inside out, the seam allowance will do this on the interior. If you don't do that, this will happen. The inner curve will have the seam allowance unable to stretch enough and sit flat, and the outer will be bunched up on the inside. Oh, also corners get clipped for the same reason. And now the inside out edge gets top stitched. Now let's connect the top and bottom half. This fabric doesn't fray, so I'm not worried about seaming it together like this. We're not out of the woods yet though, by the way. The final weird part is coming up. More ironing and then some stitching on either side of the seam allowance to tack it down nice and flat. This will be hidden by a belt on the other side. Okay, so remember the shorts? Yeah, they're back. Line that up with the seam allowance pressed upwards. That way we're absolutely sure to catch it when we stitch in the ditch. Here's aforementioned ditch stitching. Now when you get to the end, you'll see that I folded the shorts edge inwards. But I'm also stopping my stitch a ½ inch from the end. Very important. That's because we have another zipper. But this zipper has to both close and stay open at the same time. Yeah. It'll close the upper edge and then pass through that area we left open and then be sandwiched by the folded shorts edge. And this way, the rest of the zipper can continue along the flap edges. We're going to start sewing this from the top edge. Also, make sure the connectee part of the zipper is at the top. I know it's usually at the bottom, but not this time. Sew until you reach where the seam is closed on the shorts opening. Repeat on the other side, and then flip it around and start sewing up from the bottom edge of the flap. And do this until you reach where we ended on the last stitch. Connect the zip part of the zipper and then hand sew a few spins of thread in the zipper teeth around this point where you want the zipper to stop going down. Thank you, Anime Things, and I suppose Beyonce, for this really weird design. You know what though, cosplay is problem solving. Yeesh, okay, we can now breathe and connect the back trapezoid. This isn't a separating zipper, but it really never needs to separate, so you could even sew it shut so it never moves. Okay, belt. Nylon strap to prevent stretching. Basically wrap it in faux leather, poke holes through it somehow. Now, I own some punches now that I hammer in, but this is really a struggle. And if you're gonna go and use the wood burner route like this, please ventilate the room or do it outside and wear a mask. Okay, now listen, I know my silicone is old, but I poked it with a stick and it worked anyways, so that's a win. Oh, and yes, the thing I'm casting is in fact those math and alphabet fridge magnets. Make it out of whatever you want though. Oh yeah, and the belt has pouches and this weird pillow pouch thing at the back. So hey, let's go get that batting out again. The pins here signify where I need to stop sewing to turn inside out. And the pouch parts get the sides seamed on. More top stitching on the pillow thing. I feel like a broken record. I don't really know where the rest of that footage went, but the pillow thing that goes in back of the belt got folded in two and then kind of like stitched around while stopping and leaving enough space for like the belt to pass through. I don't know where the footage went, I'm sorry. Ah, the plus symbols are ready. Or times. To connect them, I'm scratching up the surface and then super gluing them to the straps. And the end of the zipper tab. This chain that connects to the belt loops that didn't have footage either, not complicated though. Lastly, the armor parts, shall we? Well, like any armor, let's begin with the I said that already. Before I glue the halves together, I need to round these edges so that they have a distinctive, deliberate seam. Then I can connect it with contact cement. The outer edges were rounded too, so they're nice and complete for when I glue them to the border. Some 2mm foam for these two other pieces here. The centerpiece is 4mm, so there's still a 2mm height difference. And then yeah, more sanding. Then we bust out the blowtorch and heat seal to remove fuzzies. You can use a heat gun too. I'm using a heat gun right now to shape up the foam. So this seam here is intentional, so what I'm doing here isn't to hide it, but just to even out and round out the pit. I do the same around the rest of the piece too. This is quick seal, by the way. So that's it for that piece. Let's now move on to the faux leather parts, for now. These lines right here are guides for where to fold the edge before top stitching them down. I really wish you could see properly. Again, I'm so sorry for the old footage with the old cameras. Anyways, the finished V shapes get lined up together and clamped in place. Looks like about 6 per arm. Sorry, this was a while ago. Then just stitch over the existing stitch lines to connect the junctions. The cool thing about this is it can wrap perfectly around with no visible connecting seam line. Okay, next is some white faux leather. By the way, if you're ever making this and using my pattern and you don't want to be using faux leather or fabric, maybe you're using foam or something, just remember to leave out the seam allowance so that it's the right size. This section of the arm really just has a lot of strips sewn into circles. So now we're going to sew a bigger tube. Then we iron a tube. Then we hem a tube. The tube is very important for this triangle tube because it's going to secure the bottom edges that are currently just flapping around to a closed point. Do that all around. The other side of this is going to our white faux leather and blue strip from earlier. But first they need to be connected to one another. Oh, and a little Velcro for later. Now the same thing as the black tube, but on the blue and white tube. Throw that aside for now. Thought we were done with weird shapes? No, here's another one. Honestly, blame Final Fantasy, not me. You know the drill. Now grab the triangle tube back and add this weird shape to it. I'm using Gutermann Creative Fabric Glue because it slaps very hard. Oh yeah, and add the Velcro strip on the red sleeve shoulder seam as well. You'll need it later for not falling apart purposes. This is 2mm foam, but the added 2mm borders will give the piece a little bit more strength. Not a ton of strength though, mind you, so that's where the inner tube Velcro will come in handy later. You already know all these steps from earlier. Now onto the bracer. The wrist has a very dramatic, thick bangle shape, so to make sure we aren't fighting with our foam to hold that shape, let's build that shape hollow. Now when cutting a curve, it's always best to do it in one non-stop motion, but sometimes that's just not doable. The main part here, and then some overlaid details for later. It's good to glue details onto curved shapes while curved so that they offer less resistance. And this piece is longer than the main piece on purpose so that it wraps around and fits perfectly while curved. The last face on the wrist part, and now it's ready to be lined up for gluing. And yes, it was kind of awkward. So it's good to sand every piece that you can prior to gluing them together because that avoids having to sand like the insides or like rounding the edges on the insides of pieces after they're glued on, because then you kind of have to avoid accidentally like hooking the bottom edge that you're, not trying to sand, that you're trying to keep nice and flat or what have you. So yeah, there tends to be a lot of back and forthing between the sanding station and the work table, the sanding station, work table. And because chances are if you're gluing something, you're creating a seam that needs to be evened out or sanded. For this strip, the halfway point is marked, and I'm using Foamworks tools to cut into the surface of the foam, but not all the way through. Then, between each circle, a half cut is made along that line, and some more half cut lines on top of the wrist parts. The reason I'm doing this here is because it's going to be way easier to paint later. I wipe the marker away with some alcohol to properly see. Now heat can be used to open up these half cuts. Really cool way of adding subtle details. And you could open it even more while hot with little tools. And more heat shaping. See how well it holds its shape because of all the curves glued in? And now, more quick seal. There are these little weird shapes on top of the bracers too, so let's make those now. It took a little bit of doing to pattern them, but it involved a few pieces with some inner and outer cuts. That way they sit at the perfect angle. I like to use a stone bit to gently round off some seams or edges. And now onto the one hand. Oh, I remember this era of my head tattoos. I called it Prison Phil because I only had head tattoos where Dr. Phil has hair. The top of the handpiece has these ridges. Each line gets half cut and then we'll go onto the finger pieces so we have the least amount of sanding station trips as possible. Speaking of, here's an example of why I should have sanded this prior to gluing it on. Alright, so again we are going for Bouncy Castle. Here I'm folding the half cuts open and sanding them smooth to a round taper. And I'm really glad that worked. Oh, also I'm not over the whole googly eyes rivet trend thing. Is anyone else still doing it? And this is how I prime a bunch of small pieces. Hot glue them to little foam stems onto the nasty foam puzzle mat. Now the undersides don't get primed, but some of these bits need a camouflage of black paint. Also, my bad, these pieces were base coated in spray paint, and so were these. My friends, it is time to shade. The googly eyes are based in black acrylic and then shaded with oil paint. I had done a test on this paint and the oil paint spread super nicely, but now it's acting weird. So I'm cleaning the oil paint off with dish soap. I noticed some of the areas were spreading nicely and others were gripping to the paint. The culprit was quick seal. I guess it gave the base coat a bit of a rubbery texture even through the base coat. There are always solutions. So either you could do a clear coat layer on top with some like matte varnish or something like that, and hopefully it creates enough of a texture difference and a distance away from the problematic area. Or I have discovered this right here. Rapid fill. I think I don't know if it's gonna be, it looks flipped to me, but it says rapid fill. It doesn't say lift, dip, wrap. Anyways, I got this from Red Moon Cosplay Solutions, and what it is it doesn't actually fill. It says fill, but it doesn't actually fill and like hide seams the way like Quick Seal does. But what it's really good for is that it kind of adds a layer, like a nice uniform layer. I used it actually in my Scourge Axe video. I can link it down below as well, unless I forget. And I plan on testing this out on top of Quick Seal to kind of restore that foam texture so that it's more uniform, because the Quick Seal kind of gives a little bit of a rubbery surface compared to the porous surface next to it. So it might look flat when you put like Plasti Dip on it, but the underneath texture is still slightly different, and I guess that does have an effect on oil paint. The black base coated parts get silver now, and the wrist parts start to get their colors. This is why those half cuts are super helpful. Way easier to stay into the lines. The yellow parts first I base coated in white though, so that the yellow can go on super clear. Also, I want the blue shoulder to have a bit more of a nuanced blue ocean-like coloring, so I'm stippling different shades of blue. And some shading too, to make it defined even further. That 2mm piece now gets glued onto the blue thing. We'll come back to this. First, let's glue some more stuff. This is some fishnet fabric going over the center of the bracer. The fabric is also going to help the other pieces adhere correctly, including a zipper to get in and out of the thing. This Velcro here corresponds to the top of the jacket. Yeah, and this is sandpaper on top of the glove here. I really want this to stick. They get contact cemented because it just seems like a stronger bond. And this Velcro corresponds to the one on the white band. Also, this is the glue gun I use. I got it specifically for this narrow nozzle. Okay, so before you think this next part is silly, allow me to explain. This Velcro could have been an elastic or something, but its main function is to help support the weight so it's not all on that 2mm piece. And that gets glued onto the white permanently. Another chain detail here, and that should do it. And oh hey look, more tattoos appeared on my head. This is truly a trip through time. I was super happy with how this project turned out. I was nervous about it, but you know what? It all started coming together and I'm really happy with it. And seeing all the photos of their group and the cosplay being worn, it feels really nice. By the way, in case you were wondering, if you had any questions for me ever, I stream everything on Twitch. So there's links down below in the description if you want to come hang out during the live streams and see these projects being made live. If you have any questions to share, there's also the Discord if you have any questions, or if you want to share some of your work. It doesn't just have to be cosplay, it could be anything. If you do creative writing, even, we've had some people who do that. Photography, different types of art, any kind of art really, you can come share it in the Discord. Maybe one day I'll make a Final Fantasy cosplay for myself. There is one or two on my mega wish list of things that I might make. Of course, don't forget to give this video a like if you liked it. Of course, I'm not asking you to lie. Lying is bad. And maybe consider subscribing if you like my videos. I promise that I use a better camera for my other videos, but I have a backlog, as I said. I do apologize. I would also like to thank my Twitch subscribers. Thank you so much, guys. As always, you the best. You the best. And a special thank you to Wyatt. Any tier 2 and tier 3 subscribers. Thank you so much, Wyatt. Alright guys, time to go forth. Time to go forth with the rest of the backlog. Take it easy. Godspeed, my friends.